When you get your brains working early this morning, what is something, this is going to be a frustrating question, what is something you consistently lose? Keys. Did I hear a watch?
My mind.
Socks, my mind.
My glasses.
Phone.
I really use
Everything.
Bible set, a scroll, a glass, it doesn't matter what it is, I'll find it later, but, yeah, I use everything.
Everything. That's a good answer. I hate losing things. You probably are like me that you hate losing things. And it seems like the smaller you get, the more valuable it is, and the harder it is to find. And I will set something down, and like you said, like I just can't find it after I lose it. And you find all this stuff in the couch cushions and in your car, and you're like, man, how did this get here? And I think that I've got 4 reasons, at least right now, that things get different places. But I lose stuff all over the place. Thank you. But for all of us that lose stuff, we do stuff in our lives. We spend time like making sure that we don't lose those things. We put up security barriers in order for us to make sure we don't lose the stuff that's valuable to us. There's stuff out there that you can buy that you can whistle or clap your hands or whatever, and it will make a noise. Or you can just use your fancy iPhone or phone and have a GPS. So you have to use a satellite at some point all the way up in space to pinpoint this thing that's behind your chair. And you've got all these security things and buffers to make sure that we don't lose these things that are important to us. And I think about this, and not only do we lose physical things, but there are emotional and relationships mentally like that we're connected with that we don't want to lose. We don't want to lose relationships in our lives. And so we do things, we put up barriers in order to protect the relationships that we have. Again, in our lives, you probably have a lock on your door. You probably have a lock on your car. And you put those locks on there, or you have them installed, and you lock them consistently in order to make sure that you protect your stuff. And we do the same thing with our relationships. We say, I want to protect my relationships, and so I'm going to do things in order to protect them and make sure that they are safe. In a word, what we're trying to protect is unity. We're trying to protect unity. We're trying to protect this bond that we have with each other. And I think that as we look at this, what we're going to see in the Bible today, in the Old Testament, in specifically Kings, chapter 11 and chapter 12, if you've got a Bible, I would encourage you to turn there. What we see is humanity's best attempt at trying to keep our relationship and our unity together. And how do we keep this relationship that seems like it's splitting down the middle? How do we keep it together? In 1 Kings chapter 11 and chapter 12, I'd encourage you to turn there. We are going to be doing a lot of reading today because I feel like the text speaks for itself, and it's better to hear it from the Bible than it is from me. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at the nation of Israel. If you remember last week, we looked at Solomon. He built the temple. The nation is in a prime spot to succeed. And yet what we're going to see today is that all of a sudden Israel is going to be faced with really a need for unity. And there's going to be everything tearing it apart. And so what we see is humanity in a nutshell, pursuing unity and fighting for unity. And we're going to see 4 strategies that humanity uses. And this is going to be true for you in your marriage. This is going to be true for you as parents. This is going to be true for you in your work environment. These are all strategies that you and I use in order to try to preserve unity in relationships. And we see this back thousands of years because humanity goes back to the same things every single time to try to make relationships work. And so in 1 Kings chapter 11, what we're going to see is the first strategy that we use to fight for unity and avoid loss. And that first strategy that we use is tolerance. We use tolerance to fight for unity and to avoid loss. In 1 Kings chapter 11, what we see is Solomon. And we remember Solomon from last week because he was building a temple, and it was a really impressive temple. And what we see at the very beginning is that Solomon decides to tolerate, for the sake of unity, for the sake of relationships, some things that he shouldn't have tolerated. Tolerance, by definition, is the ability or the willingness to tolerate something, in particular, the existence of opinions or behavior that one does not necessarily agree with. So it's kind of grinding your teeth and saying, I'm going to allow this for the sake of maybe having some sort of unity. And Solomon, the son of David, the builder of the temple, has been blessed. He's in a good spot right now. And all of a sudden, we see some tolerance start to creep in to his life. In chapter 11, verse 3, here's what it says. It says, Solomon had how many? 700 wives who were princesses, and how many concubines? 300 concubines, and they turned his heart away. And we look at this and we say, what? Like we can like drop our jaws and literally say, what is happening in this relationship? Like, this is not a healthy relationship. But what we see here is that Solomon's method for getting along with his 700 wives and his 300 concubines was tolerance. And that's got to be like an understatement, right? Like, if you've got 700 people that are just in your life, you've got to have some sort of tolerance. But he decides, hey, this is the way that our relationship, our marriages, I don't know if that's enough quotes, our marriages are going to work. And it says he marries foreign women. And these women, and this is another understatement, these women come with baggage. They come with baggage, and that's not a knock on women, but that's a knock on these women. These 700 women came with baggage because they were foreign women, and they had their own culture that they were bringing in from Egypt and nations all over the place that had nothing to do with Israel. But for the sake of unity or for the sake of whatever, Solomon marries all these women, and all of a sudden this, like, America is a melting pot. But for Solomon, this was like a melting pot times 1,000, because it was just all these cultures, all these religions, all of a sudden getting mixed together. And Solomon basically has a choice. He says, I can be unified with God, or I can fight for unity with these 700 wives and these 300 concubines. That's the choice that he has. And in order for this to work out, here's what it says in 1 Kings 11, 4 through 6. It says, when Solomon was old, his wives turned his heart away to follow other gods. He was not wholeheartedly devoted to the Lord his God as his father David had been. Solomon followed Ashtaroth, the goddess of the Sidonians, and Milcom, the abhorrent idol of the Ammonites. Solomon did what was evil in the Lord's sight, and unlike his father David, he did not remain loyal to the Lord. So basically what happened is Solomon looks around at all these wives, and he says, in my heart, the best way for this relationship to work is that I'm just going to allow this to exist and just see how this goes. God wants this, and sure, that's God's standard, but in order for this to work, I'm just going to have to do it my way. I'm going to just have to follow my heart. And we see in Jeremiah chapter 17, verse 9, that that's not a very good solution to anything. When you follow your heart and you just kind of do what you think is best, Jeremiah 17:9 says, the heart is more deceitful than anything else and incurable. Who can understand it? Basically, what he does is he turns it over and says, this is the best strategy that I can have. This is the best thing that I can go for. And this is what he allows. He tolerates all these women. And whether it's for a holistic kind of approach where he says, well, if we're going to have peace in the nation, we have to marry all these different people. If he has a good reason for it, or if he just says, wife 432 just needs me to allow her to do this. Like, it's whatever it might be. Tolerance is not a good option, and it destroys unity. You look at verse 9, 10, and 11. 1 Kings 11. The Lord was angry with Solomon because his heart had turned away from the Lord. Do you see any pattern there? His heart turns away. His heart turns away. And what his heart is turning towards is allowing these other people in his life to influence him in a negative direction. His heart had turned away from the Lord, the God of Israel, who had appeared to him twice. That's in there for a reason. That all of a sudden Solomon, who knows God, who God has approached and said, I have a relationship with you, Solomon is turning away and saying, God, I know you have a standard, but I'm going to do it my way. I'm going to tolerate it my way. And then he says he had commanded him, verse 10, he commanded him about this so that he would not follow other gods, but Solomon did not do what the Lord had commanded. Then the Lord said to Solomon, since you have done this and not kept my commandment, my covenant and my statutes which I commanded you, I will tear the kingdom away from you and give it to your servant. This is really impactful for us. Solomon is seeking the approval of people instead of God. And in his seeking the approval of people instead of God, destroys unity. Destroys the relationship that he has. And we can use the exact same excuses that Solomon uses. We can say, well, we don't want to upset people. We don't want to push too far. We don't want to step on any toes. And even if you look in the church, we can say, well, we don't want to share the gospel with this person. We don't want to talk about Jesus in this way because people might get offended a little bit. Or we might not want to approach this Christian brother or sister because if I tell them, hey, you probably shouldn't be doing this, they might not like me anymore. And we come up with all these excuses and say, well, I'm just going to tolerate this because it's not that big of a deal. And in doing so, it promotes the splitting and the divisiveness, and it kills unity. Because unity doesn't thrive in tolerance. It thrives when people speak the truth in love. Oftentimes in my culture and bringing up in church, it was very easy to just be able to say, well, I don't want to have a confrontational conversation with this person. I'll just pray that they change. I'll just pray. And you know me, I like praying. Like, prayer is effective, prayer is important, prayer is powerful. But there are times where we have to say, I'm not going to just tolerate this. I'm going to have a difficult conversation. And I'm going to do so in love. And the loss that Solomon experienced was future and inevitable. That's got to be a sinking feeling, right? Solomon all of a sudden knows that because of what he has done, by tolerating all these 700 wives, he knows that the nation is going to be split apart. And Solomon just gets to sit there and watch it happen. And so it leads us to the second strategy here that we as humanity tries to use in order for unity to take place. And the second one is uniformity. Uniformity. 1 Kings chapter 11 gives a list of 3 men, even before Solomon dies, even before the nation splits apart, 3 men that come into Solomon's life that all give him a headache after headache after headache. And one of the guys that comes up is Jeroboam. Say Jeroboam just because it's fun to say.
Jeroboam.
Jeroboam. Jeroboam is one of the men that come into Solomon's life and start to wreak havoc. And if you look at 1 Kings chapter 11, verse 31, it talks about Jeroboam. It says, and Ahijah, who was the prophet speaking to him, said to Jeroboam, he said, take 10 pieces for yourself, for this is what the Lord God of Israel says. I am about to tear the kingdom out of Solomon's hand. I will give you 10 tribes, for they have abandoned me. In other words, they have tolerated what I have not wanted them to tolerate, and so I'm stripping them of 10 of the tribes, 10 of the parts of the union, and Jeroboam, you are going to be the successor. You are going to be the next king over Israel. In verse 34 it says, however, I will not take the whole kingdom from him, talking about Solomon, but will let him be ruler all the days of his life for the sake of my servant David, whom I chose and who kept my commands and my statutes. I will take 10 tribes of the kingdom from his son and give them to you. Now, a question for you. If you're in Solomon's chair and you're seeing the fact that, hey, everything is going to be split apart and I'm going to lose everything, what is going to be your response in order to try to deal or grapple with this? If you have to deal with this division that's going to happen, what are you going to do?
What would I do?
What would you do?
Hit my knees and repent.
Yeah.
Beg
Right.
before I lost everything.
Okay.
Well, if I was particularly selfish in that moment, I would try and go full-on tyrant on everybody.
Okay.
Make them obey.
Kind of control the situation.
Force obedience so that they can't scatter.
Okay, so we've got two extreme options. We've got one that's like, I've got no hope, and so I'm going to turn to one person that I might be able to get hope from, God, or I'm going to go tyrant on everybody, and I'm going to try to control the situation. Any other things on the spectrum that you guys have?
We're still in the modern era. We're still in the diaspora. We're still looking at this shattered kingdom that's a result of this.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, we're watching it real time on TV every day. I mean, even the tensions we have in Afghanistan, all of it.
Yeah. I mean, the fact, and I'll spend 10 seconds on this, but the fact that Jewish people live in other places outside of Israel
Yep.
all comes from the fact that the nation split apart and was destroyed. So, anything else on the spectrum? If you were in this spot, go ahead, Ben.
Tolerance.
Tolerance?
You keep doing the same thing you're doing, because as long as everybody likes you and you approve of everybody, they'll still love you.
Yeah. Yeah. Keep kind of putting the Walmart happy face on everything. Yeah.
Damage control.
Damage.
Like, if it's going to happen, especially if God's the one that said it, at least you can try to do is minimize the suffering of the people you care about.
Right?
So,
For sure. Here's what he does. First, verse 40, 1 Kings 11:40. Here's how he reacts. He says, therefore, Solomon tried to kill Jeroboam.
Tyrant!
Happy face. Walmart happy face. Here's what it says, though. But he fled to Egypt. Jeroboam fled to Egypt to King Shishak of Egypt, where he remained until Solomon's death. He tried to attempt murder on this guy's life because he's like, hey, if I can kill this guy who's supposed to take my spot, everything's going to be fine. Everything will be perfectly okay. He kind of goes Queen of Hearts on everybody. Lewis Carroll's Queen of Hearts, off with their heads. You know, like if I can kill this person, I will be okay. And this is history's repeated cycle over and over and over and over and over and over again. If anybody steps out of line, if anybody doesn't look or sound the same as everybody else, and the leader comes into power and says, hey, I'm going to start basically a sadistic version of whack-a-mole, and I'm going to start like pounding people's heads down because I don't want this to get out of control. You look at that with the Nazis, you look at that in World War I, you look at everything throughout the history, that's what's taking place throughout all of history. It's uniformity. I want you to do a brain exercise, and I'm not going to ask you to say these out loud, but I want you to think 3 things, 3 subjects, 3 topics that you hope everyone in your life agrees with you on. We'll give you about 10 seconds. What are 3 things in your life that you think, hey, this is something that's really important to me, and I really hope that Lucas agrees with me on that. I really hope that somebody else will be on my side in that. As you're thinking about that, I'll keep talking. It's really nice for the people that are around you in your life to agree with you. Like, it's just nice to be surrounded with people that say, definitely, I agree with you. I mean, I'm going to hit some nerves here. On vaccines, I really like it when everybody agrees with me on vaccines and coronavirus. I really like it when everybody agrees with me on how I vote. I really like it when people agree with me on what kind of food to eat and what kind of alcohol to not drink or to drink. I like to be surrounded by people that agree with me on all the things that I care about, on finances, on education, on sports, like everything. Like, it's just nice to have uniformity in that way. Like Solomon, we use uniformity as a tool to avoid or to attack people who don't agree with us. We say, well, they believe this, they think this, I'm not going to be around them. Or they believe this, they think this. Man, let me tell you how you're wrong. And we attack them. And we don't have this ability to have unity without uniformity many times in our life. And it gives the impression of unity, but oftentimes we lose and we don't have any sort of unity whatsoever. Now here's what I'm asking. I'm not asking you to change all the things that you feel strongly about. I think that there are people that have different opinions, and I believe, hey, your opinion on things, you've come to this conclusion for a reason. What I am asking you for is to increase your passion for unity, even if the person on the other side of the room from you believes this about vaccines, or this about alcohol, or this about this, or this about this, or this about this. Like, instead of saying, hey, I'm going to give up on my stuff, just say, hey, I'm going to increase my level for unity and my passion for unity, because unity does not necessarily mean uniformity. Third thing. Third strategy. Pride. Now, this is a hard one to diagnose and a hard one to dissect because pride is so often easy to overlook, but pride is the third thing that we see here in this division of the nation. In 1 Kings chapter 11, verse 43, what we see is Solomon rested with his ancestors and was buried in the city of his father David. His son Rehoboam, that's a fun word to say, let's say Rehoboam. Rehoboam became king in his place. So instead of the strategy being enacted by Solomon, Solomon is dead, his son Rehoboam takes the spot, and Rehoboam becomes king in his place. Now, I'm going to use some vulgar language for some of you, but I just feel like this makes sense in this context, and so I'm going to take advantage of it. Some people are just stupid. Some people are just stupid. And oftentimes when stupid people do stupid things, most of the time stupidity starts because we can't get out of our own way. And Rehoboam couldn't get out of his own way. He just couldn't. Instead of accepting any sort of wisdom, instead of taking a step back, Rehoboam, in his idiocy, plunges forward with self-righteousness and his pride and his plan for unity in the nation. And instead of unity, man, just looking at Rehoboam's life, Rehoboam falls flat on his face and the nation splits entirely down the middle. all because of his stupidity. We're going to spend a minute reading because this makes a lot more sense than me just trying to recap this. But it's starting in 1 Kings chapter 12, verse 1. What we see is Rehoboam just being an idiot. Rehoboam. Then Rehoboam, after his dad is dead, Rehoboam went to Shechem, for all Israel had gone to Shechem to make him king. When Jeroboam, son of Nebat, the guy that fled because he was going to get murdered, heard about it, he stayed in Egypt, where he fled from King Solomon's presence. Jeroboam stayed in Egypt. But they, talking about the people, summoned him, and Jeroboam and the whole assembly of Israel came and spoke to Rehoboam. Your father made our yoke harsh. You therefore lighten your father's harsh service and the heavy yoke he put on us, and we will serve you. Here's the olive branch of unity. We will come together. We will be unified. Just make it a lot easier on us. If you remember Solomon, he employed 30,000 people to build a temple. He drafted them in to service. This was a guy that wanted to see things get done, and so he made it really difficult on the people of Israel. Verse 5, Rehoboam replied, "Go away for 3 days and then return to me," which makes sense. I'm going to take some time to think about it. So the people left. Then King Rehoboam consulted with the elders who had served his father Solomon when he was alive, asking, "How do you advise me to respond to this people?" They replied, "Today, if you will be a servant to this people and serve them, and if you respond to them by speaking kind words to them, they will be your servants forever." There's this offer then of peace and let's get along. The elders, the people that knew what Solomon was all about, come along and say, "Yes, let's do this. Let's agree to these terms. This will work out in your favor." And so he says, verse 8, "But he rejected the advice of the elders who had advised him and consulted with the young men who had grown up with him and attended him. He asked them, 'What message do you advise that we send back to this people who said to me, lighten the yoke of your father who put on us?'" So he's got his friends around him and he says, "Well, I want to get my friends' opinions on this. I want to get the people that know me best." Verse 10, "The young men who had grown up with him told him, 'This is what you should say to this people who said to you, your father made your yoke heavy, but you make it lighter on us.' This is what you should tell them. My little finger is thicker than my father's waist. Although my father burdened you with a heavy yoke, I will add to your yoke. My father disciplined you with whips, but I will discipline you with barbed whips." Some translations say scorpions. So Jeroboam and all the people came to Rehoboam on the third day, as the king had ordered, "Return to me on the third day." Now you think about Rehoboam, the idiot. Again, in history, hindsight, we can call anybody an idiot if they're an actual idiot. So we've got license to do this. What do you think he's going to say? Here's what it says. Verse 13. "Then the king answered the people harshly." That's what people like, is being told harshly things. "He rejected the advice that the elders had given him and spoke to them according to the young men's advice. My father made your yoke heavy, but I will add to your yoke. My father disciplined you with whips, but I will discipline you with barbed whips." The king did not listen to the people, because this turn of events came from the Lord to carry out his word, which the Lord had spoken through Ahijah the Shilonite to Jeroboam, son of Nebat. When all Israel saw that the king had not listened to them, the people answered him. I mean, you can almost see come on, Rehoboam. What's going on? He said, "What portion do we have in David? We have no inheritance in the son of Jesse. Israel, return to your tents. David, now look after your own house." So Israel went to their tents. But Rehoboam reigned over the Israelites, living in the city of Judah. And I look at this, and it's verse 18. "Then King Rehoboam sent Adoram." So he's like, wait a minute. I see the nation falling apart on me. We've got to do something. So he sent Adoram, who was in charge of forced labor, but all Israel stoned him to death. Rehoboam sends this guy to his death. King Rehoboam managed to get into the chariot and flee to Jerusalem. Israel is still in rebellion against the house of David today. Where in the last 19 verses do you see Rehoboam's smarts on display? Anywhere? He's got a big head. There's not a whole lot of hey, this makes sense, Rehoboam. There's only sense of pride, self-righteousness, and self-indulgence and egotistical nature that he's got going on, because Rehoboam was so prideful that unity was destroyed and loss happened everywhere around him. This guy that he sends, he gets murdered. The nation falls apart. Jeroboam, this guy that comes out of Egypt, of all places, gets to be this king on the other side of the border, and all of a sudden he's left with just a tribe and a half kind of a deal. What happened? It all started with pride. Because pride and unity don't exist. I saw a guy with a t-shirt the other day. It had the word team, and there's always that saying of there's no I in team. But they had written it T-E with an I, A-M. They just inserted the word I in there because oftentimes if you're in a team and you've got somebody that's self-absorbed and prideful, you know how difficult it is to work with that person. If there's a prideful person anywhere in your marriage, in your family, in your work environment, it's going to be difficult to have any sort of unity whatsoever. Self-absorbed people. And before you say, because my thought is like, man, I hate when that person is so prideful. Oftentimes when I say that, I have to look at myself in the mirror and say, well, I'm actually the prideful person at this point. Like, because we all revert back to that self-righteous type of attitude. And if you are that person, or if you are working with that person that is self-righteous, what you will find is unity is impossible. Unity just doesn't work. And that leads us to our fourth strategy that we find not in Solomon, not in Rehoboam, but we find it in Jeroboam. Jeroboam puts on a display of how unity could work, and it's with bribery. Bribery. And Jeroboam, the first king of this newly splintered nation, wants to ensure the health and the unity of this new nation. And so he uses bribery as his strategy. And here's the two kind of rules that he lives by. He says, rule 1, be the greener grass that everybody wants you to be, because they're looking for something new, something fresh. And rule 2, give them a reason to go back. Don't give them a reason to go back. You look at 1 Kings chapter 12, verse 26. Here's what Jeroboam said to himself. The kingdom might now return to the house of David. If these people regularly go to offer sacrifices in the Lord's temple in Jerusalem, and the heart of these people will return to their Lord, King Rehoboam of Judah. They will kill me and go back to the king of Judah. So the king sought advice. Then he made 2 golden calves, and he said to the people, going to Jerusalem is too difficult for you. Israel, here are your gods who brought you up from the land of Egypt. He set one in Bethel, and he set up the other one in Dan. He offered sacrifices, verse 33. He offered sacrifices on the altar he had set up in Bethel on the 15th day of the 8th month. He chose this month on his own. He made a festival for the Israelites, offered sacrifices on the altar, and burned incense. So basically what he does is he says, you know, all that law, the first 5 books of the Bible, yeah, that was a good suggestion. We're going to scrap that. We're going to start over. We're going to build our own religion over here so that you don't ever have to go back to Rehoboam and our nation can be completely unified. And so he basically gives them a carrot at the end of the stick and says, here's the new us. Here's how things are going to function now. This is going to be great. It's going to be a lot of fun. And he sets this up in such a way that the people are now no longer needing to do what God wants, but now it's just it's just Jeroboam's method. It's Jeroboam's way of going about it. His solution is give the people what they want. Give the people what they want. It's the equivalent of being a terrible, terrible parent. It's saying, hey, I know we don't really have any structure in this house. I know we don't have any discipline in this house. I know there's no bedtime or whatever. But I give you candy and ice cream, like, whenever you want. And I let you do basically whatever you want. I buy you toys. I do fun things with you. And what we see for the next 2 weeks, what we're going to be looking at, is Jeroboam and Rehoboam's like echo of how they destroyed the nation through their method of trying to unify it. Basically, their best attempts at trying to unify this nation fall on their face and it destroys it. Because our strategy, coming back to us, our strategy, just like their strategy, is an impossibility for unity. It just doesn't work. Our tolerance, our uniformity, our pride, our bribery, it does not end in unity. They are all failed strategies. And yet we go back to them over and over and over again. You've probably tried these in your own life. You've probably had these tried on you in your own life. But it fails at unity. And it leads us to the next big word, which is division. This is a case study on what not to do. And the consequences of this portion of the Bible is all about division, that humanity's best attempt at trying to unify only lead to division. And so what we're going to end with very quickly here today is how do we have unity? Because it would be a really sad story if I just gave you 4 reasons that it doesn't work. So here's what we see is how we have unity. Because God offers unity to Solomon. And he offers it to Jeroboam. He says, here's how you can be unified. In 1 Kings 9:4, God offers this unity and peace. He says to Solomon, he says, as for you, if you walk before me as your father David walked, with a heart of integrity in what is right, doing everything I have commanded you, and if you keep my statutes and ordinances, I will establish your throne over Israel forever, as I promised your father David. You will never fail to have a man on the throne of Israel. He gives him the solution. He says, here's unity on a silver platter. And then he says it again to Jeroboam later after the nation has been split in verse 38 of chapter 11. He says, after that, if you obey all that I command you, walk in my ways and do what is right in my sight, in order to keep my statutes and my commandments, as my servant David did, I will be with you. I will build you a lasting dynasty, just as I built for David, and I will give you Israel. What's God's plan for unity according to those verses? What's that?
I said uphold his law.
Uphold his law, yes.
Walk after his heart, basically.
Walk after his heart.
Imitate his character.
Yeah.
Just go back and read it again, because it says it right in it.
What does it say?
Just go back and read it again, because the answer's there, we don't have to explain it.
I know. What's it say? Right. That's
One of the things I love about that, when we talk about just leadership,
Yeah.
what is it to be a leader? The old guys tell Rehoboam, they say, serve.
yeah. There's a submission there. There's a coming under.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And without it, you will always engender rebellion.
Yeah. If you summarize it, and you're right, because it's in the Bible. I can't say that you're wrong. So I just but it's walk with God. Like in both of those, it's a walk with God. And if you go back to those verses, here's kind of what it is summarized. Walking with God means to have a heart of integrity, doing everything God commanded, being completely obedient to all the statutes and ordinances God has given. Walk with God. Think about that. Use one word in your own mind. Use one word that summarizes what God asks. Whether it's obedience or servitude or whatever it might be. But are all those things really important? Might be the question that we would ask ourselves. Like, that's a big task. Like, that's a big thing. That walking with God is not this like little thing. It's like, hey, go back to the Bible, and there's a lot of commands in there. And I love that type of question. Are all of these really important? Because somebody actually asked Jesus that same question. Hey, are all these commands really important? And Jesus says, well, let's think about this. He says in chapter 22, Matthew 22, 37 through 40, he says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the greatest and most important command. The second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. Get this. All the law and the prophets depend on these 2 commands. If you want unity, yeah, there's a lot of individual pieces to this, but if you want unity, it comes back to, do you love God? Do you love God? That's what it all hinges on. And that leads us into personal health and our own mission. As we apply this, as we look at how does unity really work in our own lives, here's what I want to say to begin with. With personal health, if you want to have a better emotional and healthy life this week, you need to stop fighting a battle for unity that only God can give. Your love for God is more important than you battling it out on your own and saying, hey, how do I control this situation? Because it leads us right back into the tolerance and uniformity and pride and bribery, like all that stuff. If we center it on us, we start to try to control it in our own way. But the only way that you're going to have health this week in your life and in your relationships is to stop fighting a battle for unity. Only God can win. And here's what I get this. In Romans chapter 12, verse 18 through 20, it says, if possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. Friends, do not avenge yourself. Instead, leave room for God's wrath, because it is written, vengeance belongs to me. I will repay, says the Lord. But if your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he is thirsty, give him something to drink. For in so doing, you will be heaping fiery coals on his head. Now, for some of us in this room, maybe you're looking at me and saying, yeah, but I've got to fight this battle. Yeah, but this battle is too important for me to let go. I need to fight for unity in this situation. And I'm not going to disagree with you, because this is not an argument for tolerance, and it's not an argument for apathy. But you look at what he says here. He says, if possible, as far as it depends on you, that means there's a lot of work going into this peace thing. It's not like well, I guess we just didn't get along, and so I'm going to move on. Like, no, it's I'm going to invest into this as hard as I can, if possible, as far as it depends on me. I'm going to pursue peace. But also realizing that if it doesn't end in peace, God's got my back. God's got my back. He's not going to let this go, because he's going to fight the battle for unity. He's going to make this happen. He's going to promote peace even when I've hit my dead end and I don't feel like there's any other option for me. And to reiterate this, he goes even further and says, hey, if you feel like you don't have anything else to do or don't have anything else to give, look at this. He says, hey, if your enemy is thirsty, give him a drink. If he's hungry, feed him. Hey, go an extra mile. Do something else. Pursue unity as far as it depends on you. Do something, but also realize that God is the one that is going to create the unity. You love God. You take care of loving God and loving other people, and unity is going to happen on God's terms, not on yours. That's hard, because in our culture right now, division is everywhere. And it feels like unity is a losing battle. And as I say that, I know that some of us are in positions where we just like, I have to fight for this. This is something I just want you to take a breath and realize you do everything that you can to pursue peace and leave the rest up to God. Second thing, on mission, because the church is not a stagnant organization. It is a thriving movement. We are a church for the unchurched. That means we are going somewhere. And that means that a church is supposed to be unified. And a church that is unified is going to see people converted. A church that is unified is going to see people converted. Jesus prays for this 2,000 years ago for us. For you and for me, sitting in this room, he's praying for us to have unity. Chapter 17, John 17, verse 20 says, I pray not only for these, but also for those who believe in me through their word. May they all be one as you, Father, are in me and I am with you. May they also be in us, so that the world may believe you sent me. There are two things that stand out about what Jesus asks of us as a church. The two things are love and unity. If we as a group do not have unity within this room, people that are not a part of the church, that are not saved, that are not Christians, are going to come in and say, well, if they can't have unity, I don't want to have any part of it. And so we, as a responsibility for us as a group, we have to pursue unity as far as it depends on us, because if we don't have unity, there's nothing attractive about anything that we are doing. And we know that from experience. We've been a part of churches that are like, they need to get their act together. They are not able to get along. And in that, we as Christians kind of repulse and say, hey, we don't want to be a part of that group. So how much more if we say, hey, we want to reach unchurched people. We want to reach people that don't really have a background in church. If we can't get along, what are we doing here? And so we need to, as a church, look at this and say, if we're going to be a unified body, we are not going to do so on our own effort, on our own merit. It is only going to come when we love God with all our heart, with all our mind, with all our soul, and then love people.